What's up, guys? It's Dakota, and we're going to be going back to an old series that I did a long time ago, going over some cards that were pretty useful in their format, or cards that just seemed interesting. And this is one of the ones that I think can do both in this new standard format that we have coming out with Ravnica Allegiance releasing officially and being standard legal this weekend. So really the card that everyone's kind of talking about, the one that's the big buzz and the one that's going to break standard in half, or at least kind of put a damper on it and ruin it, is Wilderness Reclamation. And it does something very simple. At the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. So played for a long time, and possibly even if you're a newer player, can understand that just being able to have your lands untap and have all of your mana essentially for your opponent's turn when you can be very interactive with them is pretty good. The first thing that comes to mind when people see a card like this is how can it slot well into control decks, because obviously just getting to play your cantrips and your draw spells and on all these other things on your turn, and then just being able to untap all of your lands to have your permission spells on your opponent's turn is obviously very strong. Another thing that comes to mind is these big ramp decks that play cards like Expansion Explosion to try to just one-shot your opponent out of the game, or just kind of get value from it by dealing a lot of damage and also drawing a lot of cards as well to then potentially end the game. So going over Wilderness Reclamation in itself and why it's going to be very good in Standard, and even kind of going into Arena a little bit, because this is where this card's really going to shine, is in the best of one format in Arena, since most people aren't playing the kind of answers that you want for this card. You know, like Assassin's Trophy is very good, Mortify getting a reprint in Standard, that card can easily be slotted into the main decks of some decks to deal with this. But really, other than that, there's no really efficient answer that comes to mind right now that deals with Wilderness Reclamation in pre-boarded games and in games of best of one, where your opponent just gets to play this card, untap their lands, play a spell, and then untap, and then like play Teferi or something like that, and then just go to town on untapping their lands, getting to play a bunch of spells and a ton of mana worth of spells per turn cycle. And this is where the idea, the doomsday scenario of people is like, oh my god, this card's going to ruin Standard, everyone's going to play Teferi, Wilderness Reclamation, and it's just going to blow up the format. And I would agree if we didn't have so many good cards to deal with said cards in the format. So one of the ways that I can see Wilderness Reclamation being really abused is obviously getting to play your draw spells and things like that to dig for certain cards on your turn, and then having your lands untap and being proactive on your opponent's turn. Also, the one that's very obvious to a lot of players that have been playing Standard for a while, turn 4 or turn 3. Usually turn 3 is when you want to be playing it, because it's the soonest you can start going off with Nexus of Fates. So you play this turn 3, untap your lands, play whatever spell on your opponent's end step, untap, play your 5th land, and then just go to town with Nexus of Fates and things like that, to then just close out the game in some way, whether it's hitting your land drops and fireballing your opponent, or just value it's a fairy and boring them out of the game. But in reality, in seeing this card, there is going to be a lot of incidental hate that's good in the format, or cards that are also going to be good in the format that are going to hit this card. As I kind of told people before, I think Assassin's Trophy is probably an underutilized card, and people, while they overvalue the giving your opponent a basic land for a card that can basically say you don't lose the game by getting rid of their biggest threat as far as a permanent, and then obviously like they get a basic land out of it. Who cares? Most decks probably don't even care that they have the basic land. Just whatever thing you're blowing up was probably going to give them more value than that basic land anyway, and the deck thinning for the most part being irrelevant. So with the cards like that, Mortify being a destroy target creature, which is a lot of creatures, it's a good removal spell that destroys a lot of the creatures that people have a problem with in the format, and also gets rid of enchantments as well. So there's a lot of good enchantments that are being played that card hits as well. So in theory, that card being main deckable isn't super crazy. And of course, like the threats that they've had before, Bedevil and Vraska's Contempt as well, being cards that deal with some of the other things that make Wilderness Reclamation pretty busted. And the important thing to know is for even those decks, being able to just shut off of their, or rather the way that I should say this, is Wilderness Reclamation is kind of like a super ramp spell, but just like what problem ramp decks have and other decks like it, and kind of a way that you can get punished for playing this card, is when you have a ton of mana, it's having something to do with it. And really the only card that kind of beats that is if they draw Expansion Explosion, which lets them obviously draw a ton of cards at instant speed with Wilderness Reclamation to then kind of gas up and negate the drawback of just having tons of mana and nothing to do with it. But on the flip side, once your opponent runs out of gas and either not playing Expansion Explosion, then you just kind of get to do your thing because they get to have all this mana, and unless they have a Flip Search for Azcanta or have a Arch of Vraska, they're not really getting a whole lot of value from playing this card. So while this card, obviously the ceiling is super high, the ceiling being that this card could absolutely be an enabler for some really degenerate decks in Standard, realistically, there's probably a lot of times where you're either just going to be able to deal with it, or it's just not going to do anything for your opponent. And even if it does do something for your opponent, you probably weren't winning the game anyway, or you just had to close out the game faster. And with some of the decks in Standard, there's just a lot of times where you're not going to have a great matchup against anything. And I think the decks that are playing this card had good matchups against the decks that aren't good at it anyway, so it just gave more percentage points in the matchups where this card and the decks itself are good, but didn't really change anything as far as the other decks are concerned as far as matchups. So in short, the TLDR of this video, Wilderness Reclamation is a very good card, borderline busted, but it's busted because of the cards that you can play alongside with it, not just the fact that this card does something inherent. When looking at this card is obviously when they have like the very best card in the situation, then this card's busted. It needs to be banned. But if they don't have it, which they, it's always a game where like they always have it when they're playing you, but they never have it when they're playing someone else. It can't be the thing that we get caught up in. It has to be, yeah, there's sometimes where they will have it, and yeah, it feels bad when they do, but there's probably a good portion of the time where they don't, and this card just sits on the battlefield, and while it gets them value by giving them a ton of mana, not having anything to do with that mana is also just doesn't do anything at all. This thing doesn't draw cards. It just enables degenerate things to happen, but as long as you can either A, stop those degenerate things from happening, or they just never draw their degenerate things, then this card, in some ways, is kind of fair. And that's probably all it's ever going to be, is just kind of fair, But that's really going to be it for me. Wilderness Reclamation, great card. Going to be playing it in Standard. If you're not going to be doing the busted things, stop people from doing the busted things, and I like doing stupid things. So I'm definitely going to be playing this card. But that's going to be it for me. If anybody has any reservations or thoughts, opinions, ideas, or just want to shout at me about how stupid Wilderness Reclamation is and how it's going to get banned, whatever, things of that nature, please do not hesitate to leave a comment on this video, and let's have a discussion about this card. I think it's great. I think it's going to be a staple the time it's in Standard, and no, I don't think it's going to be banned anytime soon or ever while it's in Standard. But yeah, that's going to be it for me. Again, if you'd like to discuss this card with me at all, please do not hesitate to leave a comment on this video, and we can definitely have a discussion about it. Also, be sure to like the video if you want to see more videos like this going over specific cards in Standard, Modern, Vintage, Legacy, Canadian, Highlander, Backyard, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. I'll be more than happy to take suggestions and look into some of these cards, whether from newer sets or older sets. And, of course, be sure to subscribe to see more sweet videos like this, and hopefully we can up the production value so we can get sweeter cards and some sweet visuals, because I want to be able to play with things like that. But that's going to be it for me, and I'll see you guys in the next video.